Hegel's legacy. Hegel is an important philosopher. His penetrating analysis of the human predicament in modern society is perhaps unsurpassed among social observers of the past 2 centuries. At the same time, his thought is subtle and complex. His writings are difficult, even infuriating, laden with impenetrable and pretentious jargon from which his meaning can be separated only with skilled and careful surgery, even then usually not without risk of mortal injury. The inevitable result is that Hegel is cited much more frequently than he is read, and discussed far oftener than he is understood. Some of those who discourse on Hegel with the greatest sophistication know him only through warped, inaccurate, or bowdlerized second-hand accounts. For instance, accounts of the Hegelian dialectic as thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The Hegelian quote-unquote ideas which capture the popular imagination are often not present in Hegel at all, or have only the most tenuous and dubious connection with what Hegel actually thought or wrote, before it gains currency. A fact about Hegelian doctrine has often been so distorted by oversimplification and misunderstanding that the truth from which it started is almost impossible to recognize. This is the case with the traditional images of Hegel as reactionary, absolutist, totalitarian. Taken literally, of course, these images have been long discredited, yet in our liberal culture they nevertheless possess a kind of symbolic truth, because they represent this culture's self-doubts projected with righteous venom into its iconography of the enemy. Hegel is especially unappealing to that dogmatic kind of liberal who judges past social and political thinkers by the degree to which they articulate the views which, it has been decided beforehand, all people of good will must share. The values of Hegel's social thought will be better appreciated by those who are willing to question received views and take a deeper look at the philosophical problems posed by modern social life. Hegel leaves the liberal's state pretty much intact, but his social theory is mercilessly critical of the ahistorical, individualistic, and moralistic rationale which liberalism provides for it. In its place, Hegel gives us an alternative interpretation of modern social life, of modern economic and political institutions, of modern humanity's conception of the human good, of the meaning of its fundamental and insatiable drive for freedom. This means that although Hegel's theory was put forward as a rational defense of the modern state, his true legacy belongs rather to the critics of modern society. The basic tendency of Hegel's social thought is to undermine modern society's liberal self-interpretation, to the extent that its institutions have been shaped by this interpenetration. Its tendency is even to criticize those institutions themselves. He presents a communitarian rather than an individualistic rationale for modern economic and political institutions and of the freedom they seek to actualize. This provides the basis for an indictment of any society which tries to call itself free, even though it fails to offer its members any rationally credible sense of collective purpose, leaves them cynically discontented with and alienated from its political institutions, deprives them of a socially structured sense of self-identity, and condemns many of them to lives of poverty, frustration, and alienation. It leads us to question the value of the formalisms, representative democracy, the market economy, the protection of individual liberties, with which liberals wish to identify freedom, and to emphasize instead the social contents and consequences which liberals would usually prefer to leave open by excluding them from the domain of collective concern and control. Once we realize this, we can understand why it is that Hegel's most bitter 20th century foes have been those who want to save the liberal state from its radical opponents on the right or the left. We can also see, through the ironic deception they perpetrate, when they avail themselves of the distorted 19th century image of Hegel as quietist and conservative apologist, what they fear in Hegel's thought is not quietism, but the very opposite, subversion of the liberal status quo. Clearly, Hegel's social thought is now outdated in important respects. As Hegel writes about them, the family, civil society, and the state are clearly institutions of the early 19th century. Hegel insists on the one hand that all human individuals are persons and subjects who must be treated universally as such. On the other hand, he defends a state which excludes women from public life entirely, and large segments of the population from all political participation. With hindsight, it is easy for us to perceive an irreconcilable antagonism between these two positions. We are just as unlikely to be persuaded by Hegel's defense of hereditary monarchy or his version of a version of a representative legislature. Even more fundamentally, the nation-state itself was probably never able to play the lofty role in human life which Hegel assigned it. Yet, at a deeper level, Hegel's philosophy may not be dated at all. It is not clear that we have in any way surpassed Hegel's conception of modern human beings, their history, their needs and aspirations, and the general social conditions required for their self-actualization. Without denying the right of persons and subjects, Hegel asserts against liberal orthodoxy the vital necessity for modern humanity of concrete social situatedness and integration. He reminds us that without this, the formal freedom to make arbitrary choices and express our subjectivity leads in the direction of alienation rather than self-actualization. He stresses the point that we cannot be free unless our social life is self-transparent. We must be able to gain rational insight into it and live consciously in the light of this self-awareness. Hegel remains an important social thinker largely because these ideas, products of the age of German idealism, are still central to our aspirations as reflective social beings. Hegel is also current because these same aspirations are still radically unfulfilled. This can add only urgency to Hegel's idea that the values of those freedoms liberals most prize, though real and important, is nevertheless only conditional, since it casts serious doubt on the extent to which the conditions are really satisfied. Hegel meant the philosophy of right to afford its reader a joyous reconciliation with the social world around them. But for us, the actual effects of studying Hegel's book may be very different from what its author intended.